I want you to picture the absolute worst road trip you have ever been on. You know the kind I'm talking about, where you miss an exit, the GPS dies, maybe you run out of gas in the middle of nowhere, and the snacks are long gone.
The classic, this was supposed to be a 3-hour tour kind of scenario.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, take that feeling of frustration and panic and multiply it by, I don't know, about 1,000. Because the story we are unpacking today is essentially the ultimate grocery run gone wrong.
Huh, that's a good way to put it.
It starts with a guy saying, "I'll be right back with some food," and it ends with him accidentally navigating the entire width of the South American continent.
Accidentally is the key word there. We are diving into the story of Francisco de Orellana, and if you think you know the history of the Amazon or even the conquistadors, this story, it kind of flips everything on its head.
I know the name Orellana, and I know he's associated with the Amazon, but in my head, I always pictured him as this, master explorer. A guy with a map, a compass, and a master plan to find a new trade route.
And that is the first bubble we have to burst right out of the gate. There was no map. There was no plan. This was not a scientific expedition.
Okay.
This was a desperate, starving survival situation from pretty much day one. We're talking about the 1540s here.
So no GPS, no satellite phones, just a lot of steel armor and some very bad decisions.
Precisely. And to really understand Orellana, we have to understand the world he was living in. This is the era of conquistadors, sure. But we need to look past the shiny, history book version of that. By 1541, the golden age of easy conquest was, well, it was actually closing.
What do you mean by that? I thought this was peak conquistador time.
Well, yes and no. The big prizes had already been taken. Hernan Cortez had already conquered the Aztecs in Mexico. Francisco Pizarro, who is a key player in our story today, had already conquered the Incas in Peru.
Right.
They had looted the treasuries. I mean, they were the billionaires of the 16th century.
Okay, so the big jackpots are gone.
Right. But you still have thousands of young Spanish men pouring into the New World. They're soldiers, they're ambitious, they're heavily armed, and they are fundamentally unemployed.
They missed the boat on the big score.
They missed the boat on the Aztec and Inca gold. So they are sitting around in Peru, restless, looking for the next big thing.
Which sounds like a recipe for civil unrest, to be honest.
It was a powder keg. So for the guys in charge, like the Pizarro brothers, they needed to find something for these guys to do. They needed a new rumor to chase.
And there's always a rumor.
Always. And in 1541, the rumor wasn't gold. It was La Canela.
The land of cinnamon. Now, I have to ask, why cinnamon? I mean, I like cinnamon on my toast, maybe in a latte, but I'm not going to march into a jungle and risk death for it. Why were they so obsessed with the spice?
You have to adjust your mindset for inflation, and I don't just mean currency. In the 16th century, spices were the oil of the global economy. They drove international trade. Cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, these things were incredibly rare in Europe.
So it was a status symbol.
It was a massive status symbol. If you served meat with cinnamon, you were showing off extreme wealth.
So it was like serving caviar and truffles today.
Even more so. It was also used as medicine, as a preservative. If you could find a forest of cinnamon trees, a source that bypassed the expensive trade routes through the Middle East, you weren't just rich, you were buy your own country rich. It was a lottery ticket worth more than a gold mine.
So Gonzalo Pizarro catches wind of this land of cinnamon somewhere to the east of Quito, and he decides to go all in.
He does. Gonzalo is Francisco Pizarro's younger brother. And you have to imagine the psychological pressure there. Your brother is the Francisco Pizarro.
The famous one.
The famous one. You're the younger brother living in his shadow. You need a win. You need your own empire. So when he hears about a valley of cinnamon, he launches what is arguably the most expensive expedition of the time.
And when we say expedition, we aren't talking about a couple of guys with backpacks and hiking sticks.
No, this was a moving city. We're talking about roughly 220 armed Spaniards, cavalry, infantry. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. They brought along roughly 4,000 indigenous porters from the Andes to carry the supplies.
4,000. That is a massive amount of people to feed and organize.
It gets crazier. They brought nearly 2,000 live pigs.
Pigs.
Walking bacon. You can't preserve meat easily in the jungle, so you bring the animals with you and slaughter them as you go. They also brought hordes of hunting dogs, llamas for carrying gear, and of course, horses for the cavalry. It was a massive, chaotic parade leaving Quito in February 1541.
And this is where Orellana comes in.
Yes. Francisco de Orellana was a childhood friend of the Pizarros. They were all from the same town in Spain, Trujillo. It's actually wild how many conquistadors came from this one tiny, dusty town.
It's like the Silicon Valley of 16th century conquest.
Basically, Orellana had already lost an eye in a previous battle, so he's this rugged, one-eyed veteran. He's appointed as Gonzalo Pizarro's lieutenant. He actually had to scramble to gather his own troops and horses to catch up with the main group.
So they merge forces and they head east. Now, I've looked at a map of Ecuador. Going east from Quito means crossing the Andes Mountains and then dropping down into the Amazon basin. That transition sounds rough.
Rough is an understatement. It's a biological shock. You start in the high Andes, it's cold, thin air, freezing rain. Then you descend rapidly into the Amazon cloud forest. The temperature spikes, the humidity hits 100%, and the vegetation just becomes a wall.
And remember, these guys are wearing 16th century armor.
Exactly. Full steel breastplates, chainmail, heavy wool padding underneath to prevent chafing. They are basically walking ovens. They're rusting inside their own clothes. And almost immediately, the expedition starts to fall apart.
How fast are we talking?
Incredibly fast. The accounts are terrifying. Before they even reach the flatlands, they're hit by an earthquake. Then, as they drop into the jungle, the livestock starts dying. The horses get hoof rot. But the human toll is the worst part.
I read that the attrition rate for the indigenous porters was just catastrophic.
It was a tragedy. You have people from the high Andes, adapted to cold, dry climates, suddenly forced to march through a malaria-ridden tropical swamp carrying heavy loads. They died by the hundreds, then the thousands. Disease, exhaustion, hunger.
So the massive army is shrinking every single day.
By the time they reach the Coca River, which is a tributary of the Napo River, the expedition is a shadow of itself. They've found some cinnamon trees, but they're scattered, poor quality. It's not the forests of gold they were promised.
So the dream of the lottery ticket is fading, and now they are just hungry.
Starving. They have eaten all the pigs. They have eaten the llamas.
Right.
Now they are looking at the dogs.
Man, that is grim. And this is where the terrain really turns against them, right? They can't just walk back.
Right. The jungle is too dense to hack through with swords and machetes effectively, especially when you are weak from hunger. The river becomes the only road. But they don't have a boat.
So they have to build one. Now, hold on. These are soldiers. They aren't shipwrights. They are in the middle of a rainforest. They don't have a Home Depot. How do you build a seaworthy vessel in the middle of the jungle?
This is one of those Apollo 13 moments of history that I just love. It highlights the ingenuity of desperation. They set up a forge in the middle of the jungle. They need nails, right? So what do they use?
They don't have nails.
They have horses, dead or dying horses. They take the horseshoes, melt them down in charcoal fires, and forge them into nails.
Wow. Talk about burning your bridges or, well, burning your transportation to build a boat.
It was a massive sacrifice. The horse was the tank of the 16th century. Giving up a horse was admitting you weren't going to ride home. For caulking the stuff to seal the wood gaps, they used their own torn clothes mixed with gum from rubber trees, likely taught to them by the few remaining indigenous guides.
And the wood.
They hacked down green trees. It wasn't seasoned wood, which is terrible for boat building because it warps, but they had no choice. They built a brigantine, a large oared vessel, and they named it the San Pedro.
But this wasn't an escape vessel for everyone, was it?
No, it wasn't big enough. It was essentially an ambulance. They loaded the sickest men, the heaviest gear, and the few remaining precious items onto the boat. The plan was for the boat to float down the river while the rest of the army walked along the bank.
So they are limping along, a boat in the water, walking skeletons on the shore.
And it's agonizingly slow. The people on the bank are hacking through vines, wading through swamps. They're making maybe 2 miles a day. And there is no food. They are literally boiling the leather from their saddles and belts with herbs just to chew on something that tastes like protein.
I can't even imagine the level of desperation where a belt looks like dinner.
It's the end of the line. And this brings us to the Great Split. It's December 1541. They're camped by the river. They are dying. Pizarro hears a rumor from some captured natives that there is a village with food a few days downriver.
A glimmer of hope.
Pizarro makes a command decision. He calls Orellana. He says, take the San Pedro, take 57 men, take the remaining healthy ones, go downstream, find this village, load up on food, and come back to save us.
It sounds like a standard military maneuver.
Yeah.
Send out a scouting party, secure supplies, return to base.
Theoretically, yes. Orellana agrees. He takes the boat, takes the men, and pushes off into the current. And here is where the hydrology of the Amazon basin changes history. The current in these upper tributaries is violent. We aren't talking about a lazy river ride, it's a torrent. The San Pedro is swept downstream at incredible speed. They cover in a few hours what would have taken the walking group weeks.
And do they find the village?
They find nothing, just endless green, impenetrable jungle. They go for a day, 2 days, 3 days. No village, no food.
And now they have a problem. They've gone way too far.
Exactly. They realize that even if they found food now, they could never get it back to Pizarro. They try to turn the boat around just to test it, and they realize the truth. They physically cannot row this heavy, homemade boat upstream against that current.
So they are trapped by the physics of the river.
They are past the point of no return.
This is where the controversy starts, isn't it? Because back at the camp, Pizarro was waiting. And waiting. He's eating leather straps, watching his men die, scanning the river for Orellana, and Orellana never shows up.
Pizarro was furious. When he eventually gave up and walked back to Quito, a journey that took months and killed most of the remaining survivors, he branded Orellana a traitor. He called it a mutiny. He said Orellana stole the boat and abandoned them to die.
But looking at it from Orellana's boat, do they have a choice?
This is where we have to rely on the account of Gaspar de Carvajal. He was a Dominican friar who was on the boat with Orellana. He wrote a chronicle of the journey, essentially a diary.
And what does the friar say?
He describes a near mutiny, but not against Pizarro. The crew mutinied against the idea of going back. Orellana apparently wanted to try, or at least he said he did. But the men, starving and exhausted, signed a document which Carvajal recorded saying, "If you force us to row back, we will die. It is a suicide mission we refuse."
So Orellana is stuck between a rock and a hard place. If he goes back, his men rebel, and they all likely die of exhaustion. If he goes forward, he's technically disobeying orders and abandoning his commander.
Exactly. He's looking at the water, looking at his starving crew, and he makes the only choice he can. He resigns his command, and the men elect him as their new leader, a legal trick to protect himself from treason charges later, and they decide to follow the river wherever it goes.
Into the absolute unknown. They don't have a map. They don't know if this river flows to the ocean or if it goes over a massive waterfall.
They are flying blind, and this begins part 2, the descent. They are now alone. 50-ish men and a priest in a homemade boat drifting into the heart of the continent.
So let's talk about life on the river. They're still starving, right?
Oh, it gets worse before it gets better. They are in the river of darkness. For weeks, they're scavenging roots, eating toxic plants that make them sick, boiling their shoes. Carvajal writes about how they look like ghosts.
But they eventually hit the Napo River proper, and things start to change. They start seeing signs of life.
They do. They hear drums. Imagine the terror of that. You are floating down a river, weak and vulnerable, and you hear the rhythmic beating of drums from the jungle. It means you are being watched. It means the news of your arrival is traveling faster than you are.
And they realize the San Pedro isn't going to be enough.
Yeah.
If they hit the ocean, a river barge won't survive the waves.
Right. They need a bigger boat. So, in the middle of hostile territory, while constantly being harassed by indigenous canoes, they decide to stop and build a second vessel. The Victoria.
I love the optimism of that name.
Victory. It's pure survival instinct. They set up another forge, they use charcoal, and again, the ingenuity, they use the fibers from forest plants to weave rope. They use oil and fat from turtles and manatees to seal the hull.
Manatees.
The Amazon is full of life. Once they got lower down the river, food became less of an issue because they could fish, hunt turtles, and yes, raid native villages.
Which I assume didn't make them very popular with the locals.
Not at all. We have to be clear here. They were invaders. They were stealing food to survive. The indigenous groups, like the Omaguas, defended their territory. Orellana's men were constantly dodging arrows, fighting skirmishes on the riverbanks, and fleeing back to the boats.
And the river just keeps getting bigger and bigger.
It becomes an inland sea. The Amazon isn't like the Mississippi or the Danube. In the rainy season, it can be 30 miles wide. You can't see the other bank. It's terrifyingly vast. Carvajal describes storms on the river that were as violent as storms at sea.
So they pass the Rio Negro, which Orellana named because the water looked black like ink and they keep drifting east. And then, in June 1542, they have the encounter that changes the name of the river forever.
The Amazon incident.
Set the scene. Where are they?
They are likely near the Trombetas River Junction. They approach a village to look for food, expecting the usual resistance. But this time, the resistance is different.
Different how?
Carvajal writes that the fight was incredibly fierce. The indigenous warriors were organized and relentless. And leading the charge, or at least fighting in the front lines, were women.
Women warriors.
Yes. Carvajal describes them vividly. He says they were tall, fair-skinned, which might be an exaggeration, and they fought like 10 Indian men. They were firing arrows with incredible precision. They were clubbing the Spanish soldiers.
And Orellana, watching this from the deck of the Victoria, has a light bulb moment.
You have to remember, Orellana is a man of the Renaissance. He's educated, he knows his Greek mythology, he knows the stories of Herodotus and Diodorus.
The Amazons, the legendary tribe of warrior women from Asia Minor who supposedly cut off their breasts to shoot bows better.
Exactly. For centuries, Europeans had been obsessed with the idea that the Amazons were real, living somewhere on the edge of the known world. When Orellana sees these women fighting, he doesn't just see a different cultural gender role, he sees a myth come to life. He goes, aha, we found them. These are the Amazons.
It's fascinating how they projected their own stories onto the new world. They didn't have a frame of reference for what they were seeing, so they just pasted a Greek myth right on top of it.
It's a classic example of cognitive bias. He expected monsters and marvels, so when he saw strong women fighting, he categorized them as Amazons, and the name stuck. He called the river Rio de las Amazonas.
And that's why we don't call it the Orellana River today.
Although for a while, some maps did try to call it that, but the myth was too powerful. The Amazon is just a better story.
So they survive the Amazons, they keep drifting. We need to emphasize the duration of this. They left Pizarro in December. It is now August.
8 months. 8 months of rotting clothes, rusting armor, constant mosquito attacks, sleeping in a cramped boat. The mental toll must have been staggering.
But finally, on August 26, 1542, the water changes taste.
It turns salty. They reach the Atlantic.
The relief must have been overwhelming. But they are not safe yet. Now they are in 2 homemade boats, the San Pedro and the Victoria, staring at the open ocean.
And riverboats, specifically flat-bottom brigantines built with green wood and horse snail spikes, are not designed for ocean swells. They had to navigate north along the coast of Brazil and the Guianas to try and reach Spanish settlements in Venezuela.
And they get separated.
They do. In the night, the 2 boats lose contact. Orellana on the Victoria thinks the San Pedro is lost. But miraculously, both crews manage to navigate the currents and storms. They reunite on the island of Cubagua in September.
That is an unbelievable stroke of luck. To travel across a continent, get separated in the ocean, and then bump into each other at the finish line.
It just reinforces the whole accidental odyssey theme. They shouldn't have survived any of this.
So Orellana makes it back to Spain. He has a hell of a story to tell. But the story he tells, well, people didn't believe him.
And this brings us to the most controversial and maybe the most interesting part of this deep dive, the civilization question.
Right, so Carvajal finishes his book, The Relation. And he doesn't just describe trees and monkeys. What exactly does he claim he saw?
He describes a densely populated civilization. He talks about seeing cities that gleamed white stretching for miles along the riverbanks. He describes massive fleets of canoes, organized road systems, and huge stores of food. He essentially describes a thriving, complex society, maybe comparable to the Incas or Aztecs, but in the jungle.
And for about 400 years, historians looked at this book and said, yeah, right.
They dismissed it completely. They called Carvajal a liar, a fantasist, or just delirious from hunger.
Why were they so skeptical?
Because when later explorers went back a century or two later, they didn't see any of it. They saw small, scattered tribes living in thatched huts. They saw endless, empty jungle. They saw no stone cities, no massive roads.
So they assumed Carvajal just made it all up to impress the king.
Exactly. Look at this great land I discovered. Please give me funding. There was also a scientific argument called the counterfeit paradise theory. The idea that the Amazon looks lush, but it's actually a desert in disguise. The soil is acidic and poor. If you cut down the trees to farm, the nutrients wash away in the rain. Therefore, the argument went, the Amazon cannot support a large civilization. It's biologically impossible.
And here's where it gets really interesting. Modern science has started to say, wait a minute.
Yes. In the last few decades, archaeology has completely vindicated Carvajal. He wasn't lying.
So how do you explain the soil problem? If the dirt is bad, how did millions of people eat?
That brings us to terra preta.
Which means black earth in Portuguese.
Correct. Archaeologists started finding these patches of soil along the riverbanks that were totally different from the surrounding yellow clay. This soil was dark, black, and incredibly fertile. You could plant anything in it.
But it wasn't natural.
No. It was anthropogenic, man-made.
Wait, how do you make soil?
It's a technology called biochar. The indigenous people practiced slash and char, not slash and burn. They would smolder wood and waste to create charcoal, then mix it with pottery shards, fish bones, compost, and manure. This mixture created a super soil that retained nutrients for centuries.
So they were terraforming the Amazon?
Literally. They engineered the ground beneath their feet to overcome the limitations of the rainforest. And the scale of this is mind-blowing. We're finding patches of terra preta that cover hundreds of acres.
And the existence of the dirt proves the existence of the people.
You don't get millions of tons of engineered soil by accident. It implies a massive sedentary population that lived there for thousands of years.
So Carvajal did see cities.
He saw the riverfront settlements of a civilization that we now estimate had a population of around 5 million people in 1500.
5 million, that's huge.
It's comparable to major European nations at the time.
So the big question is, where did they go? If Orellana saw them in 1542, and the next guys didn't see them in 1650, what happened in between?
The same thing that happened in Mexico and Peru, but faster. Disease. Smallpox, influenza, measles. The tragedy is that the diseases traveled faster than the explorers. Orellana and his men likely introduced these pathogens, or they spread from the Andes down the trade routes.
So the germs moved down the river ahead of the next expedition.
Exactly. In a dense population like that, living in connected cities along a river highway, a virus moves like wildfire. By the time the next Europeans arrived, 90 to 95% of that population was dead. The cities were abandoned, the wooden structures rotted away in the humidity, the jungle reclaimed the land.
That is heartbreaking. It means Orellana was likely the last European to see this civilization intact.
He took a snapshot of a world that was about to end, and because the evidence rotted away, we spent 400 years calling him a liar.
Talk about a heavy legacy. So let's get back to Orellana himself. He survives the trip. He's vindicated, well, 500 years later, but at the time, he thinks he's sitting on a gold mine. He goes back to Spain.
He heads to Valladolid. He wants a reward. He wants to be named governor of the Amazon. He calls it New Andalusia.
Does the king grant it?
Eventually, yes. Prince Philip, who would later be Philip II, gives him the commission in 1544. But it was not easy. Orellana was broke. He was fighting off accusations of treason from the Pizarro camp. He was dealing with Portuguese spies who were worried the Amazon mouth was in their territory.
It sounds like a political thriller.
It was, but amidst all this drama, Orellana does something very surprising. He gets married.
To Ana de Ayala.
Yes, she was a young woman, very poor. And Orellana decides, I'm going back to the Amazon to found a colony, and I'm taking my wife with me.
That seems ambitious. Taking a civilian woman into the green hell in the 1540s.
It was almost unheard of for a first wave of conquest. But it shows his mindset. He wasn't just going to loot and leave. He wanted to settle. He wanted to build a home.
So the stage is set. This is 1545. Orellana has his commission, his wife, 4 ships, and 300 men. This is the return of the king moment.
And it is an unmitigated disaster from the moment the anchor lifts.
What goes wrong?
Everything. It's actually painful to recount. Before they even cross the Atlantic, they stop in the Cape Verde Islands. An epidemic sweeps through the fleet.
Probably dysentery or flu.
Something like that. It kills 98 men. That's a third of his force dead before they even see America.
Then they hit the ocean.
And they lose a ship. One of the vessels, carrying 77 men and 11 horses, just disappears in a storm, never seen again.
So he arrives at the mouth of the Amazon with a battered fleet, starving men, and thin horses.
And the Amazon mouth is tricky. It's a delta full of islands and sandbars. They get lost. They can't find the main channel they came down years before.
And the locals?
They remember. The indigenous tribes aren't surprised this time. They are hostile. They attack the landing parties. There is no food.
The source material gets really dark here. It says they were back to eating the dogs.
Yes. History repeats itself as a tragedy. They are stranded in the swamp. They eat the dogs. Then they eat the remaining horses.
The very things that gave him an advantage.
Once the horses were gone, they were just dying men in a swamp. Orellana is frantic. He takes a small boat to try and find the main river channel to find food. He fails.
And Orellana, the man who survived the unsurvivable the first time.
He breaks. Physically, he's sick, likely malaria or some tropical fever. But mentally, he returns to his camp to find more of his men dead. And in November 1546, he dies.
There's a quote from his wife, isn't there?
Yes. Ana de Ayala survived, incredibly. She was rescued by a passing ship later. She said Orellana died of illness and grief.
Grief. That hits hard.
I think it speaks to the totality of the failure. He had seen the promised land. He had the title of governor. But he couldn't conquer the geography a second time. He died lost in the intricate mouth of the very river he gave his name to.
And he was buried there.
Presumably. We don't know where his grave is. The river likely washed it away. He became part of the Amazon.
It's such a tragic arc. He starts as a sidekick, becomes an accidental hero, discovers a civilization, gets branded a traitor, and then returns only to die of a broken heart in the swamp.
It really is Shakespearean. But his legacy is undeniable. He put the Amazon on the map, literally.
So let's zoom out and look at the big picture. What is the takeaway here?
I think the biggest takeaway is about the nature of discovery. Orellana is often remembered as a failure because he didn't find El Dorado. He didn't find a mountain of gold.
But he found something arguably more important.
He found the Amazon civilization. He was the witness. He saw the potential of the rainforest to support humanity in a way that we are only just now rediscovering with Terra Preta.
But the tragedy is that his discovery was the bell that tolled for that civilization.
Exactly. It raises that provocative question, does discovering something inevitably change it? Or in this case, destroy it? Orellana opened the door, and the world he found vanished through it.
That is a heavy thought. He found a world, named it after a myth, and then that world became a myth itself.
A ghost story told by a friar that turned out to be true.
Well, I think that's a perfect place to wrap up. It certainly makes you think twice about complaining when your flight is delayed or you get stuck in traffic.
Yeah. It definitely puts our modern travel disasters into perspective. At least we don't have to build a boat out of horseshoes.
True. Thanks for taking this journey with us, everyone.
Stay curious.
We'll catch you on the next Deep Dive.